Welcome to this introduction to Cinema 4D tutorial. In this video I will be walking you through the interface of Cinema 4D R14. This is Pete Merrick with Triplet 3D. So let's jump right into Cinema 4D and we'll start off with the tools in the left hand column. So this is the model tool. This is the mode that we will be on when we're modeling. If you just create a parametric primitive like a cube, and you need to model this, scale it, rotate it, move it. This is the mode that you want to be on, model. The next mode down, the object mode, this is for moving, scaling, or rotating the actual object if you're in animation, while you're doing animation. So let's just stay on the model mode. Coming right down the list, this is the texture tool. So we'll get into this later on, but this will allow you to edit a texture on your geometry. This here is the Workplane Mode. So what this does, you'll notice that there's a grid right underneath this cube. So if I go to my Workplane Mode, this will allow me to actually move my grid. Alright, that's what that does. We'll get into these tools in the next tutorial. This is our point mode, our line mode, and our polygon mode. Right now we can't use those since we only have a cube selected and it's not editable. And like I said, we'll get into that in the next tutorial. This is the move axis tool. So right now, again, we can't do anything with it because this is not editable geometry. Okay, so one of the really important features of any 3D software application is navigating the viewports. So right now we're in the perspective viewport. If we wanted to see all four sides of this cube, we would click this icon in the top right hand corner of the viewport, and that'll allow us to see the top, the front, and the right hand sides. So in Cinema 4D there are four different ways that you can navigate the viewports. The first is there's these four icons on the top right hand side of each viewport. The first one on the left, if you click and drag this, that's your pan. The second one is your zoom in and out, click and drag on that icon, and the third one is your rotate. So that's one way to navigate the viewport, to get around your object and pan and zoom. The other way to do it is hold down Option on your keyboard. If you hold down Option, this is on a Mac, I'm not sure about a PC, so hold down Option on the keyboard and left click and drag. That's to rotate around your object. If you right click and drag, that's your zoom, and if you hold on Option and center click and drag, that's your pan. Alright, and the last way to navigate the viewport is by holding down the 1, 2, or 3 keys. So holding down the 1 key, if you left click and drag, that's your pan tool. Number 2 is your zoom, and number 3 is your rotate. So if we jump back into the perspective, what we could do is go through the main menu. So this is the view. If we go frame all, it's just going to zoom into all of our geometry. Alright, the cameras, this will allow you to customize the viewport. So if right now we're in the perspective, but if you wanted more of like an isometric view, you would go into your parallel. You can change this to left, right, top view, however you want to work. So this is the perspective. Display, there's a bunch of different display methods. So right now this is the Gerard shading, and that'll give us a little bit of shading, but we won't necessarily see the lines of our geometry. So if I go Gerard shading lines, now we can see the actual lines that make up our geometry. There's a few other shading methods. Quick shading with lines, again you're going to see your lines. Constant shading, this is not going to give you any definition between the different sides of all of your geometry. Again, we can turn on lines with that. If we wanted to see all the way through our object, we just turn on our lines. So the last thing that I want to show you in the viewports is you can configure your windows however you want. So right now we're in 4 views. So if we go up to panel and arrangement, you can do a 2 view stacked, so that'll give us the top and the perspective. By default, we can do 2 views side by side. There's another one over here, 3 views split. kind of confusing a little bit. You can play around with these. I like to work in these 4 views. It gives me 4 identical windows to work off of. Just play around with that until you figure out what you how you prefer to work. So if I select my cube, going up to the top of this, anytime you have an object created in Cinema 4D, you're going to have these axes. Anytime you want to move something, I would suggest that you just grab the axis to move it. The handles. If you grab this one, this is the Y, which is indicated by green. The X is indicated by red, and the Z, which is front to back, is indicated by blue. So the best way to change or move around your geometry is to grab those handles. If you just grab and start dragging, you're not really sure where it's going in the perspective view. Okay, this is the scale tool. So if you click and drag it anywhere outside of your geometry, it's going to scale everything evenly. And this is the rotate function. So if you grab one of the handles over here, you can rotate in any direction. Okay, so that brings us over to the render settings. So this, if we hit this first render button, it's going to render to the actual viewport. Okay, to get out of that, we just click in an empty area on the viewport or rotate around. The next one, if we click this is going to render to the actual picture viewer. And the nice thing about this is you can do multiple renders, and they can compare your renders right here with the previous one that you did. Okay, coming down the list, another really important one is interactive render region. So this will just interactively render in the center of your viewport, and you can resize this little triangle in the interactive render region. That will control the quality of your render. If I just scale that all the way down, scale it all the way up, you can see that there's quite a bit of difference over there. Alright, now in the render settings, coming down to the next button, this is going to allow you to render out with the standard render, physical render, software renderer, hardware, and Cineman. So let's just leave it on standard for right now. Output, right here we can control the width and the height, our aspect ratio, and then whether we're only rendering the current frame or all of the frames, like if you're doing an animation. When you're saving something, you want to make sure the save box is checked, and then click this little icon over here, specify a path to the folder where your renders are. Once you hit the render button again, you're going to have an image in the path that you saved. Okay, so moving right along, if I delete this cube, right here, right next to the render settings, we have our objects. To undock this, there's this little texture right here at the top of this. We can undock this, and then we have a floating window. This is where we're going to start creating geometry. So we can create a cube, we can create spheres. Obviously we won't see it because it's embedded right in the cube. Spheres, capsules, all kinds of different geometry. Anytime that you create any type of geometry in Cinema 4D, all that geometry is going to show up over here on the right hand side in the Objects Manager. Okay, so let's just delete all of this, and we can close out of this. These are our splines. Again, we can undock this by clicking that little texture. So if I have a freehand spline, I can go into my top view and just freehand a spline, hit enter. After you're done drawing your spline, there's all kinds of different tools like the Bezier spline, where we can actually control our spline with different handles a little bit more precisely. You can delete that. And then there's also circle splines, rectangular splines. So in order for these to actually show up in the renderer, you'll have to use these in conjunction with the NURBS object. Let me just show you that really quickly. So now we have a rectangular spline, and again it does nothing when we render to the picture viewer. Here's our NURBS object. So if I take an Extrude NURBS and I drop this rectangle right inside the Extrude NURBS, now it's actually giving me some geometry. Now if I click the Extrude NURBS, what I can do is I can control the amount of extrusion on that. Alright. Okay, let's just create another piece of geometry, a cube. Right underneath the Objects Manager, we have the Attribute Manager. And what this allows us to do is resize this cube. Alright. Resize it any way you want. And here's our modeling tools. So let's say we create an array. If we grab our cube and drop it right into the array, it's going to create duplicates of this in a radial fashion. Okay, so we can control the radius of this array. We can control the amount of copies. Alright, the frequency, amplitude will offset each cube. It's kind of a nice feature. Okay, so we can actually use multiple arrays on this object if we wanted, and then control the radius of this. Now we have a whole bunch of geometry created really quickly. So those are our modeling tools. I'll just show you a few deformers really quickly. So I have a cube, and if I add a few segments to it in the y-axis and make this cube a little bit bigger, what our deformers do is it's actually going to deform our geometry. So let's add a bend deformer. And with these deformers, they actually have to be children of the main geometry. So I'm going to drop it right into the cube. Let me show you how I did that again. So I'll take the bend deformer. As soon as you see this arrow on top of the cube, let go, and now it's a child of the cube. So to make this bend deformer actually deform the geometry, we'd have to come down to our strength and increase the strength, and that's going to deform our cube. Right now it's looking a little jagged, so what you'd have to do is go back into the cube and add more segments to it, like this. And now it's looking a little bit more refined. These are environment tools. We'll get into those later. Here's where you can set up all your cameras, all your lighting right here. And then we have a material manager over here on the bottom. So if we double click, then we're going to create a new material. So if we double click that material, we can rename this. Let's just call this red. Go into the color channel, click the color. We could change the color of the material. And there's all these different options over here. Enable an option is to click the checkbox right next to it, and then we control the amount of reflection. That's the one that we turned on by dragging this brightness slider. Okay, then you would take that geometry, that material, and drop it right onto your geometry. One other thing I wanted to show you is the layer browser. So right now we don't have any layers set up. So let's say for instance that we have a few pieces of geometry made in this scene, and we wanted to put our cube on one layer and the sphere and the capsule on another layer. Let's just double click in the layer browser, and we'll just call this layer 1. And double click again, we'll call this layer 2. Let's just take our cube and our sphere and drag it right down into layer 1. We'll take, our capsule and our sphere. And then if we take our cube, we'll drop it right onto layer 2. So the cool thing about layers is you can actually hide the visibility of layers. You can hide the visibility in the render settings. So if I take a render right now, only those two objects show up. Okay, one really nice feature about Cinema 4D is the content sensitive help. So let's say for instance you don't know what something does. So if I have my NURBS open and I wanted to show what the Hyper NURBS does, I can right click this object, go show help, and then my help will show up, and it'll have an explanation of everything that this tool does. Okay, so that's a really important little feature. So let's say I don't know what a cube does. We can go show help, the help will show up, and it'll show us all about the cube. Okay, so that's the content sensitive help. Okay, there's another window over here that you'll find really useful. It's called the content browser. So if I go to my content browser, it's broken up by prime, sculpting, sketch, sky, studio, visualize. So let's just open up visualize, and there's a whole bunch of things in here that you can use for your own animations and your own models. So there's materials. If I go into my materials, there's all kinds of bricks, car paint, ceramic, and there's also a bunch of objects in here as well that you can use. Armchairs and bath stuff and bedroom accessories. So it's a really important feature. So play around with the content browser. You'll find a lot of use out of that. And the very last thing that I wanted to show you in this tutorial is the multi-document workflow. So if I just go File, New, and let's say for instance we're in a new document and I'm modeling something. So I have a cube, and let's say I have another plane with that cube. So if I group these together, we'll just call this group 1, I can actually import that into my other file. So the way that we do that is we click on it in the Object Manager, edit, copy, and then we come over to our window and locate our first file, go back into the Object Manager and paste. And now that'll paste our new geometry into our existing document. Thanks for watching this tutorial. This is Pete Merrick with Triplet 3D. See you in the next tutorial.